Hey, friends, welcome to The Right Side Up with Danielle Strickland and James Scholl, usually. This season is an eclectic mix of fascinating topics with incredible people that I've had the privilege to meet and to talk through, most of them to read their books, to be amazed by some of the things that are happening. I'm calling this the wild card season. Wild card, because you never know from episode to episode what you're going to get and what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be fun. I promise you that. You know, I spent a whole lifetime being told to either slow down or to stick to one thing. But I have always been an eclectic, wild, curious, wide-ranged person. And I love it. I love it. And I think God likes it too. And I hope you enjoy these eclectic conversations with amazing people about some really important topics. It's a wide range. It's a wild card. Get ready to enjoy. Welcome. All right. Welcome to the Right Side Up podcast with Danielle Strickland and James Scholl, who's not here because he lives in Toronto, which is 3-hour time change. It's really hard to organize our schedules. But anyway, stay tuned. I'm going to interview him, even though he's supposed to be a co-host. Shout out to James Scholl. And with me is Aaron White, who is in Vancouver. And we are actually together in the same room, not even over a call or anything like that. And we're excited to be here because we want to talk about how we learn and some exciting things that we're doing together, mostly called Deep and Wide Academy.
Mm-hmm. You and I both have labored for years in academia in various aspects. I mean, right from a very early age. I think I started when I was 5 and started learning in various ways at Tiddlywinks Preschool in Kitsilano, Vancouver. And I remember really enjoying in the sandbox, you could use that little crane thing, the lever thing, and move it around. Yeah. And we were actually just recently at another place, and I found one of those, and still, that's what I wanted to do.
And we did.
And that's what I did.
We literally did our marketing plan around the sandbox.
Yeah.
It was super cool.
We used sand to create. And for me, that it actually struck a chord of, like, that is kind of how I learn. I need to kind of be tactile. I need to be moving. I need to be doing things. Yes. But learned very early on that that's not the way that most people are taught to learn. Mm-hmm. That's usually it's something very much of stop moving, stop engaging your body, and focus in on what somebody's saying.
Sit still and listen.
Sit still and listen.
And this is actually tragic on different personality types. I saw some reports on boys in particular that really struggle with not being able to move and stuff. And I had the same struggle as someone now who I know had ADHD or, just problems. And even it made a lot of sense of, like, even my high school. I remember, like, reading the books. I've always had a really curious mind. I love to think critically. I just really loved all that stuff, but then not being able to go to classes. And then me, everyone calling that badness, which it ended up being channeled in that direction because there's no other way to channel it if you're not conforming. But I remember having these conversations with my principal, with him saying, like, you aced the exam, but I'm failing you because you didn't go to the classes.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Like, if I know the material, and him going, look, it's not just about knowing the material. It's about, like, coming to class. And I was like, because you're, like, training me to uncritically work every day. And like, what is this? And I remember even then as a teenager, you're really just seeing this isn't right. Yeah. There's something wrong about the way we're educating people.
Well, I mean, I did learn early on that the way that education was rewarded was a way that actually did suit me in certain ways. Like, there wasn't the sandbox thing so much, but I could listen to what people were saying. I could memorize that pretty easily. I could regurgitate it. I could, that was really easy for me. And I understood, I think, even in elementary school. So for those who are listening, like, when I was 8, 9 years old, I realized, this works for me. Right. Like, I'm going to do well here.
And this is how you do this.
Yeah.
You figured that out.
It out. Yeah. I can do this well. I learned certain formulas and I could do it. And all the way through university, all the way through a master's degree, I knew how to do this and it was quite easy. That doesn't mean that I'm necessarily smarter than anybody. I just, that system worked for me and I understood it. But I know lots of people for whom that does not work. We have a common friend, Ian, who, when we show up at places together, he comes with a rucksack full of just stuff. Yes. Just like bands and like, I don't even know, like
Yeah.
rope
Keys,
and just
rope,
a bunch of art
various
stuff.
things.
Yeah.
Yes.
That he doesn't even know what we're going to do with that.
Yes.
He just is like, I felt I needed to bring it in case we needed, 80 feet of rope, and a bunch of, it seems crazy, but that's the way that he thinks. And then when he brings out his, in Canada, Mr. Dressup had the tickle trunk.
Yes.
And he'd open this.
He brings out his backpack,
his tickle backpack, and
yes.
Brings out all this stuff. And you just see some of the people in the room come alive.
Yes.
Because they're like, oh, wow, there's a thing that we're doing, and it's like engaged, and I'm watching it, I'm seeing it, and it's a different way of learning.
From like even little tiny things, like he has these laminated pictures, and they're like pictures from like National Geographic or like magazines or whatever that just like evoke certain emotions or say something with 1,000 without, that 1,000 words would take to say. And then he would just be like, baby, pick a couple pictures that kind of represent you right now. So, instead of having people having to describe where they're at and what's going on in their life, which actually literally might take 1,000 words, you have these people who can pick these pictures and say, these are what I'm feeling right now. And it's just a whole other dimension of learning and engagement and connection. Was it about Ian? This is Ian May, who, by the way, just to embarrass him properly, because he'll be petrified or, just outraged that we're naming him and celebrating him. But he is amazing. I always say if Bear Grylls and Richard Rohr had a baby, it would be Ian.
It's quite a picture. But it is true. And
deep spiritual formation met with this like tactile, embodied movement.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Yeah. And I think there are people in the room, and I can sometimes be one of them, who when different ways of learning are kind of introduced, like if somebody gets up and says, okay, we're going to learn now through dance, I'm immediately like, I'm probably not. Like, I'm probably not going to learn.
You're a good dancer, Aaron.
Well,
Stop.
I can't.
I've seen you.
However, I don't wish to. And because I've been so formed in this one particular way of learning, and a lot of people are, we think that this other way is quite fluffy. But the reality is that the way that we think education works now is a very recent phenomenon. And it's a very specific geographical phenomenon that then got kind of sent out around the world. But it's not how most of the people have learned most of the time.
Right.
And it's such a unique and specific and enforced system that there's one author, Ivan Illich, who wrote this book called Deschooling Society. Really amazing book, not the easiest book to read, but he talks about it. He just did some research, and he loved to research different things that seemed just off to him, that everyone kind of accepted as normal, but just seems like, why does everyone accept this? So he started looking at schooling, and he said he came to the conclusion that the way that we do schooling is actually a religious ritual more than anything else. And so we all know the different stages that you're supposed to go through. And there are these ritual markers at all these different stages that we all agree on. And it's very religious.
There's ceremonies.
There's things that are said. There's people who are kind of elders who give assent to certain things and give you documents saying you've done this thing. And he said, this is religious rather than anything else. It's a religious ritual that we've all accepted and that we all worship. And you start to notice that whenever people start talking about education, the way that education works in our society is kind of the highest value. And people get really uptight about it. And any kind of question of should we do it in a different way, people get really nervous.
Yeah, or even like, what qualifies you?
Right.
Where if you don't have certain qualifications, and I've always had that, like who is the body qualifying me? Like what qualifies them to qualify me? And who says so?
Right.
And how do we agree on even what that is? And I remember years ago, I was reading through the Old Testament, and when they were building the temple, it says in the Hebrew that they called the wise men together. And then it started listing the wise men, and they were all like trades.
Right.
They were all like, people who could do carpentry, and the people who could make the banners, and the ones who could do the gold and the bronze. And I realized, their wise men are not necessarily architectural designers. Their wise men are the workers who know what to do to make the actual things. And I realized, the Hebrew concept of wisdom is much different than what I understand to be knowledge.
Yeah. And when you look at the the New Testament. I mean, Jesus teaches with words, of course he does, but he teaches through lots of stories and through them just seeing and watching him do certain things in addition to words. But, we have that example. And then
then the early church at its fastest growth period was an oral tradition of the stories and person and experience of Jesus.
Right.
And then when it became actually written text and then began to be controlled by knowledge keepers, and then it got messed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now it's everywhere, which is cool. Like, I like that it's written and I like that people could read. Actually, I read that the revivals in America were the reason the literacy rate went through the roof. So it was the first cut. That's one of the miracles of sort of American, the American nation, is that it was like 80% literate.
Right.
But most people wanted to learn how to read so they could read the Bible.
Yeah.
That was a massive push. And that even some of the early education, speaking of religion, even the early education systems were through churches and Christians who wanted people to be able to read so they could read the Bible. Whereas before, people would have had to believe the priests or whoever was in charge of the text because they couldn't read. So someone would have to read to them.
Yeah.
So this is really fascinating how it began, the reading thing, which is cool. I want people to read. It's powerful. It's beautiful. But just then how we then even made the knowledge of the Bible something academic.
Right.
Something that we could understand with our minds, but actually lost the wisdom of the come follow me. Right. Embodied movement, story, deeper truths, encounter.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do now. I mean, when most people think of Bible study or church, it is very much a heady thing. It's, you sit around and you think about and debate, talk about, maybe not even debate, but you get told ideas, concepts, and then you're supposed to go away. And then the idea is that will filter through your life and will change things by the fact that some idea has lodged there. And maybe that was true. I don't know. But I think right now we're in such a world of competing, not even just competing, just like a white noise of ideas and distractions constantly hitting us. I don't know that that's the best way to actually, lodge transformative teaching into someone's life.
Yeah, I think I actually have a quote from one of my books that says, knowledge doesn't transform anybody, but knowledge applied might.
Right. Yeah.
So it's also that like disconnection between, you just have to know all this stuff. Like even in school, you know all this stuff, you tell the teacher you know all this stuff, and then you know the stuff. But really, it doesn't mean that you actually know the stuff.
Right.
You just know enough to know the stuff that they need you to know. Right. But it doesn't mean that you've lived the stuff. It doesn't mean you've like taken that knowledge and applied it to your life. It doesn't, none of that. So how do you, that's harder to measure. I think it's possible, but it's harder to measure and then harder to do. But that's the only hope we have of any kind of growth.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know how you were in math in high school.
Bad.
Yeah, you were not so good.
Well, the numbers kept moving. I was in my drug phase. So it's really hard to find out what X is when X keeps moving around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wasn't great in math either. And I kept getting put in like the math enriched classes because everyone said, well, you're smart. You can figure this out. But I couldn't figure out the math because it didn't make sense because there was no application. There was no context. There was no story to it. I was just learning about formulas and numbers, which for some people that really works. That's how their brain works. That's
so
fine.
Lucy didn't get 50 oranges to take to sell at the market.
At that level, I was kind of okay.
Okay.
But when
it got abstract, you were like, I'm out.
Well, I remember the first time X was introduced. I think I must have missed a class. It was in grade 7, and I showed up, and they said, now try and find X. I'm like, how do we get numbers and letters together now in math? I thought that it didn't make any sense to me. But I've since, only recently, been actually really appreciating math and loving math because I started reading about the history of math and why people were doing what they were doing and what it was used for, and how even a guy like Pythagoras, he sort of built a religion around math. Like it was that interesting to him and that transformative to him. And some people say that math is the language of the universe. I don't know how exactly true that is, but like to me, that put it in a context where suddenly that it mattered. It made sense. And then math becomes something that you engage with in real life rather than just a concept that you can grasp, which some people can, and that's great, but most people can't unless it's put in some kind of storied context.
I think even those people that grasp the concept, though, grasp the meaning, which is why, I think they just intuitively understand this is meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a very, very small percentage of people who can kind of do it that way. And that's great. We need those people.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us, math could be a different storied or embodied thing, which I think would be a lot more helpful.
I had a picture of the church many years ago, actually, and it was like a stick man, and then it had a really, really big head. And every time it tried to move, it would fall on its head. It's sort of like, I feel like it's a prophetic picture of how our heads are in our way because we put so much knowledge inside of our head. I remember reading somewhere that there was a missionary, and it was like a new missionary in China or something like that. And he only had like a couple chapters out of the book of Matthew. And he's like, okay, fine, we'll just do this. And they studied it, but then they lived it. And then they tried really hard to get the next part of the story, and just how transformational it was that the Christians there were like fully embodying the way of Jesus in as much as they knew to do.
Right.
And then thinking about like how much I know.
Yeah.
And then don't do. And just it's convicting on one level, but then also just the way we designed our systems of education.
Yeah.
So I think there's got to be a better way.
Well, there's a great story. It could be, I'm sure it's apocryphal, or it could be true. I don't know. But of this priest who knew there was a monk on this island, and he went and sailed to this island to go and visit this monk. And he met the monk, and the monk was illiterate. And he said, "Do you know your prayers? Do you know, and he goes, I don't know them. All I know is this one prayer, Jesus, have mercy on me. And that's all I know." And so he spent just ages trying to teach him all these prayers. And he sort of figured it out and had some of these prayers now and learned to read a little bit. And then as the priest was sailing away, he says the monk started running across the water to him and came to his boat and said, "I've forgotten all the other prayers. All I can remember is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me." And the priest said, "You're fine, brother.
I think you got it.
Go walk back to your island over the water."
Right.
There are, and I've engaged with lots and lots of people who would not be considered wise in the world, but have a deep wisdom. And I say it, and I genuinely mean it when I'm in groups of guys in recovery or who've been homeless or in addiction or all kinds of things, that there is such a wisdom in the room of experience that if people are allowed to actually apply that and then apply the word, apply the teaching to that, and not say, well, that's out of bounds somehow, then suddenly our whole world is opened up in terms of how we can understand these scriptures, at least.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think for me, one of the things I realized is in my own life, as soon as I disconnect from what I know and what God's inviting me to understand, and then how I live, not only is it a tragedy because I'm not fully living out the truth, but it's also a cause of harm. Like that's where all of our disconnection, our hypocrisy, our like losing touch with how the knowledge of Jesus actually impacts the way that I live and the way that I neighbor and the way that I, invest and the way that I, all the things. And so I think for me, I've seen this not only in my own life, but this cause of like dis-ease when what I know and what I live are disconnected from each other.
Yeah.
And I've seen it also in tons of leaders' lives. So and I teach preachers and communicators on preaching. And one of the things I talk about is that when you're preaching esoteric knowledge, like these prophetic pictures of the coming possibilities of the kingdom, and it's the future. You're really preaching the future, but then you're not living there. You're living in the reality of the present. The proper posture is not to stop preaching the future. The proper thing or the healing thing or the healthy thing is to move towards the future.
Right.
So that you're constantly moving towards this knowledge that you're being given, because the knowledge is meant to move us forward.
Right.
But I think what happens is, because we've been taught to memorize and regurgitate and get a star, but actually not move towards, we have this like deep disconnected reality. And so that's partly, I think, the only way I can explain how, the abuse crisis in the church, for example, and you have these incredible teachers, like quite literally people who are very gifted at teaching the ways of Jesus, who have not been living that way for years, it turns out.
Yeah.
And years. So and I've thought about it a lot, like these men, all of them are men that I know, have compartmentalized their lived experience to such a degree that not only are they not moving towards the knowledge that they preach, but they're literally doing the opposite.
Yeah.
Like they're causing harm. And I just think, like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Like and I think the only way you do that is you grow up in a system that rewards knowledge and doesn't pay attention or value or equate experience.
Right.
And lived experience and the embodiment of that knowledge as part of the learning process.
Yeah. We have, again, a common friend who says, if you know 5 things and you're only doing 3 of them, then you know too much. And I think that's
who's that common friend?
That's Michael.
Michael Collins.
Yeah. And I just think I mean, I don't think it's a rule to be applied like rigorously, but because, you might be in the process of learning and all that kind of stuff. However, it's just a good guardrail of like, because knowledge does puff up.
Yes.
And love builds up. And so if your knowledge is not translating into love that is building up, then you have to be wondering, well, is my knowledge then puffing me up?
Right.
Why do I want to know this? And I think it's not even just in the church world. I think it's in just the whole world that we've done this thing, that we have, been wanting to produce experts and stuff in the way that we think, in systems and so on. But it doesn't actually, if it's not leading to a greater skill in living and a greater skill in living wisely and lovingly, then what are we doing? Like, what are we actually building up? And it feels like that's just another way to power.
Yes.
Like that having that knowledge, they say knowledge is power, but it feels like knowledge or degrees, is a way to power. It's a means to power, which I think is a very different thing and a very dangerous thing.
And also, I think in these days, it's a not working thing.
Yeah.
Because that power doesn't seem to account for much. It depends on how high you go, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
And then I think you have a whole generation of people, and I would say leaders, everybody who has this like bankruptcy of body work and lots of head and not enough body to support the knowledge and to even walk it out. So we wanted to help. I think we've always, you've been committed in one place to incarnational living, which is literally the embodiment of the gospel story in your own body and household and neighborhood. And me too. I've been doing it around the planet, but similarly rooted, connected, embodied. If I'm preaching these beautiful things about justice, but not living justly, I find it difficult to sleep at night. Like I'm thankful for the connection between my head and my body and my heart. But I think I even had some more revelation in the last 10 years about, so that being a case of the way that I live, but I've even had revelation about my own connection with my body, like my own self-talk, like my own need for emotional help to navigate, my life of trauma, some of the traumatic things that have happened in my life. And so even that being this like, oh, this is about knowledge, but not head knowledge. This is about, so even, I can read The Body Keeps the Score, and I think everybody should, on how trauma can affect and land in your body and affect the way that you feel and live and disease and all this kind of stuff. But actually, it wasn't until I went to a therapist who walked me through and helped guided me in actual practices and an embodiment, and then continued to do that, that I got healed, that I would say that I moved towards a more holistic and lived wise experience of healing. So for me, I feel like on every level, like even on a self level, my knowledge that Jesus has healed all of my diseases and broken every curse and like gets, absorbs every trauma sin upon himself. I know that, but that doesn't change my own
Right.
reaction in my body. And I read more about how my body works and like, that's still good. And I know a little bit more, but that still hasn't actually transformed my situation of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go and I actually meet with somebody and we talk. And then also we do exercises that begin to embody this truth. And I'm freer.
Right.
And I'm freer and I'm freer. And I think that's what we're hoping to do at the Deep and Wide Academy, is offer. And it's weird because it's like online and we're embodiment people. We're incarnational people. We like in-person things, but we wanted to create as accessible an opportunity for as many people as possible at like an accessible rate too, that could ideally with a friend or two. So that's how we sort of see the embodiment happening, is with a friend or two, and go through a little bit of teaching. So like not hours and hours of teaching, but a little bit of teaching and then a practice that actually helps you work out that teaching, and then some reflection on that practice and some guided reflection. So, and because I believe in my own life, that's the best way I know to get what's in my head into the rest of me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how I've been teaching for a number of years now, is the fancy word is hermeneutic circle. We like to call it liberating the word, where we will do some teaching and try and, use the best academic resources that we have to understand what's going on in this writing or this issue or this topic or this Bible passage or whatever. And usually that's the extent, that's as far as we go. But we say,
or maybe we give homework.
We say, go and try
and
this.
It's individual homework. Like it's like, well, then therefore you should love your neighbor and go love your neighbor.
Go do it.
Yeah.
And some people will, and that's great. But most people go, well, I don't really, okay, I don't know how to do that.
Right.
So we say, okay, we're going to do that. And then the next week we'll come back and then we're going to come up with a plan together to say, well, what did we learn? So therefore, what are we being invited into?
Yeah.
How do we do this? And then we make a plan to do it. And then the third week we come together and we do that thing. We actually go out and do whatever that thing is, or we invite someone in or whatever, like we practice it together.
Yeah.
And then really importantly, the fourth week, we come back together and we reflect on what happened.
Yeah.
Was that the right thing to do? Did that make sense? Was that the proper application of that? And if it wasn't, well, let's start the cycle again. And we might take years in one short little passage just to make sure we get that right, or not right, but that we are applying it wisely and lovingly according to our lights.
Yeah. And here's what's interesting is I took that idea and it's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds not that hard to do, but it's actually practically hard to do, to find a practical thing you can do together that embodies the thing that you've been talking about. Like it's surprisingly, and we're all pretty smart people. Like, so that itself, like we're smart in talking about the passage. We're not so smart in figuring out how it applies and how it can apply together for us to actually practice.
Right.
That's harder.
Well, and I think that's actually an outgrowth of the way that we have learned.
Yeah.
Because we lack what I found.
We don't even know how.
We lack the creativity. We lack the imagination to even imagine how we might do that.
Yes.
Because it has felt so much like just an individual thing that we don't think of, because we're not expected to think of, how do we do that thing together? Whereas in many other cultures around the world, if they didn't do that, they would think this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like I just taught you how to, plant and make
water,
this food
whatever.
or what. Yeah.
Right.
But you didn't do like, okay, I got it. Let's go do it. No, I don't need to.
Right.
I've got the theory.
Right.
It's all sorted. No, you have to go and do it. And the reason I'm teaching you is so that we would do that together for the benefit of all.
Yes.
And we seem to have lost that sense of things.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. And thanks for being open to discover and be curious and to learn from voices that maybe you don't normally hear and topics that you really didn't sign up for in the season. But I think this crazy wild ride of discovery is a way of learning and growing and becoming even better humans together, whether we agree or not. So thanks for being on the ride. As a thank you, I wanted to offer you a code that you can enter at the Deep and Wide Academy. So that's at deepwideacademy.com, deepwideacademy.com. The code is right side up. That's the name of this podcast. So just right side up. at thedeepwideacademy.com, and it will get you 20% off on all of or any of the courses offered there. Those courses are intended to be deep and wide, experiential wisdom shared in order to pass it on, not just knowledge, but wisdom, which is applied knowledge and practice knowledge and embodied knowledge. So if this is something that might interest you, which I hope it is, and you either want to check it out and learn, or you want to be a collaborator, and you can contact us in that regard. But anyway, check it out. Code right side up. It'll get you 20% off. And deepwideacademy.com is available for you. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of this episode. And so I think the hope would be to recover a sense of that, and then just to practice like little tiny things that might be helpful. So we started the Deep and Wide Academy off with holistic self-care, which is 5 modules that I present on just things. And this is the other thing, is what I want, who I want to learn from is someone who has lived the experience. Mm-hmm. So for this one, I've literally just brought my best strategies that I've learned to live in a more healthy, holistic way, mm-hmm. and offered them, not as a trained counselor, not as a, whatever qualification someone else thinks might be required to teach this in university, because I don't want you to know all of the knowledge. I want to just share what I've experienced and learned as somebody who's tried to move towards a healthy, holistic self-care practice. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, too, I want to call all the wise people. And by wise people, I don't mean credentialed experts who are going to wow me with their extent of knowledge, although I'm sure there's going to be some of those people. Mm-hmm. But we only want to platform people who with lived experience in the topic they're presenting. Right. And there's a bishop way back in the early church who described even the Christian message as one beggar telling another beggar where to find some bread. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I kind of see that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, as you say that, one beggar telling another beggar where to find some bread, there was one of my favorite authors recently, he used this line. He said it was as surprising as finding a poor priest. And just as a kind of a throwaway line, but mm-hmm. It suggests, and there are poor priests, of course there are.
Yeah, there's whole orders of priests who declare themselves poor.
Yeah, so it's not a knock, but it's how surprising it is when people see that people who believe and say they believe in certain things or know certain things are actually living that out mm-hmm. in a way that it has integrity. And that's not easy either. Like mm-hmm. it's extraordinarily difficult to do, but that's what we're invited into. Mm-hmm. And I think we must be careful when we're calling ourselves teachers to ensure that we are actually living out as best we can, the realities of the things that we're trying to teach.
Yeah. And then also the width of it too. So that's the other thing that I've really been thinking about. Like I was telling you, Aaron, I've told a couple of people this, but I got invited to this weekend away, and it was a Wim Hof weekend. So if no one knows Wim Hof, he's this Dutch huge healer guy that uses 3 pillars towards healing, and it's breath, cold, and mindset. And my friend who struggled with depression for years and is a believer and has tried all kinds of different things and still struggles, said, I really want to try this. Would you come with me? And I said, 100%, I would do pretty much anything to help you mm-hmm. with this battle. And so we went together, and I did this deep dive on Wim Hof and sort of his techniques and cold and what cold does and all this. And this is part of my self-care course. But what happened is, I won't share too much, but what happened is when I was in this cold tub on Vancouver Island, I had this memory of the co-founder of the Salvation Army, Catherine Booth. I had this memory of learning in her own biography about how she was a cold water therapy person. I remember because I remember thinking when I was at this retreat, I was introduced in our introductions. I couldn't kind of scrub the Christian thing out of my introduction without lying. Mm-hmm. It's just impossible, which is actually probably a good sign. But the guy introduced me as a pastor, which isn't even what I said, but it was his only language he had. And then throughout the weekend, these 3 people took me aside and said, like, hey, can I talk to you? And they did it like a whisper, and I'd be like, why are we whispering? And they're like, well, I'm a Christian too, but like, should I be here? Like, I feel like, is this right? You know, and then I just asked them some questions about like, does this feel like, are you getting closer to Jesus? Like, do you feel like this is honoring Jesus, what you're doing here? And they're like, yeah, totally. I've never felt more, you know? So I'm like, well, how did we get here where we think that actually pursuing healing and alternative ways of healing is somehow counter to our faith? And then I'm in the tub and I have this memory of Catherine Booth. So then I go on this like little rabbit hole research of Catherine. And when I'm doing that, I find this whole other thing on John Wesley. And then John Wesley is credited in the medical records as being the inventor of electric magnetic therapy or whatever. So when he was a young revivalist preacher who was really into healing, by the way, because he went to medical school before and then left to become a preacher. And electricity was invented, and he read all the stuff and went to the lectures, and he just really was like, I think electricity can be a healing agency in people's lives. So he was the first guy to create a machine in his UK clinics for the poor to use to treat melancholy, which is, by the way, an old-fashioned word for depression. And he has all these journal entries. And this is actually even still an EMT therapy where they'll use like electric shock, like little electric impulses on your hands and stuff to bring you into your body. This is now even currently being used. The father of that idea was John Wesley, who's one of the most prolific Christian revivalists in history. And I had this epiphany in this tub, again, not in a lecture, in a tub full of cold water. I had this kind of epiphany of like, how did we get so small? Like, how did we make what we believe so tiny and defensive and, you know, guarded and exclusionary? And then I think even in my own life now, the cold has really like those pillars have been helpful in my own healing and in my own healing of trauma. I did a breath work session, a couple of these for a couple of hours, and literally something happened in my body that released something. I can't even describe to you what it is. I only know in theory that it's probably trauma that was stored in my body, but I can't tell you exactly what and how. I just felt the release of that.
Right.
Literally,
probably demons.
Right. Well,
like I know.
Yeah. And it's definitely something anti-Christ, anti-sacred. So call it whatever you like. But I feel like, and then it actually did make some sense of some charismatic, you know, like the groanings and the tongues and the, like all these, like they're all embodied practice, the falling over. Like it actually, I'm like, oh, I see. There's like a whole somatic thing going on in the charismatic church that maybe they don't even fully realize they're doing. But even that idea of like being able to sob publicly, you know, and just groan out what's emotions are trapped inside of my body. But anyway, it was just this full on revelation of how trapped and small. And I think a lot of this is around making our faith something that is knowledge and not embodied practice. Yeah. And so then we defending like this academia sort of idea of like high-mindedness and like, who are you? And I have to accredit you and you have to believe it this way. And we've put all these things and made all these fences around, like, instead of actually the accessibility and the like healing and the journey towards a curious life and discovering the beauty of the created world and like all these different, even like, think of the history of the Christian missionaries in North America with indigenous peoples, you know, who were like, this is what you need to believe and all this other stuff is evil. Yeah. And now we're like, wait a minute, all this other stuff is evil? Yeah. Like, what stuff? The stuff where you feel like you're part of the created order, like the stuff where you respect and honor other creatures, like the stuff where you live in community instead of individual pursuit, like the stuff where you don't own your land, but you steward it, like, which, you know. And so I think for me, it's this whole season of like, there's got to be another way. Yeah. There's got to be another way. And I'd really just love for as many people as possible to experience even a little bit of this other way. Yeah. Get curious, get discovering. And this idea of like deep is like, let's get it embodied. Let's get it practiced. Let's get it rooted and established in our lives. But this idea of wide is, let's not be afraid anymore. Mm-hmm. Like wherever there's healing, wherever there's someone that found some bread, like, so we have a friend who's a beekeeper and the bees have ministered to her, and even to have her share what the bees have taught her about God and creation and her life, and is like life-giving. Like when she talks about it, her eyes light up, literally it saved her life. And I think like, can you tell other people about that? Yeah. Like, and can we help you tell other people about that? So stay tuned for like a beekeeping course. Yeah. And
we've got I have a friend who is just really wise in terms of Indigenous protocols and postures and the right way to kind of interact honor elders and wisdom that is just true. And I was talking with him about the Deep and Wide Academy and just saying, we'd really love you to share. He goes, oh, you guys are just interested in like wisdom, like things that are helpful. And I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
And he's grown up in the church, but he's like, his interaction with much of the church is, okay, don't talk about that stuff because that's not what we want to hear. Let's talk about this stuff. And it just feels really dishonoring.
Yes.
And the more he engages with, his traditional teachings, he's like, this seems just good. And it doesn't seem at odds, at the very least, with what I've learned in this other way. It just seems wise.
Yeah.
And he invited me, and I won't share much about this, but he invited me to join him in a sweat lodge. And that was put on by this group of guys. And I was the only person there who wasn't Indigenous.
Yeah.
And I felt very honored to be welcomed in. And he welcomed me in because he knew, they'd said, if you want to bring a guest who just really needs prayer, then bring. And I really did. I really do.
Yeah.
And so I went there and I was not at all afraid of, what
the spiritual dimension.
the spirit. In fact, I was excited about that. I was more afraid of what's going to happen when the door closes and it's like unbelievably hot and
dark.
And sure enough, I mean, I got in there and I was the only person who this was their first sweat. And it was people who, were just, from the world around, not high academics or anything like that, just, folk from the world. And I was furthest from the door. And it probably ended up being a good thing I was there because when the door closed and the hot rocks were in and the drumming started and the steam started, I just was having like having a panic attack because it was just overwhelming. And I just thought, I don't know how long this is going to go. I don't know if I can handle this. Felt claustrophobic. And I was just thinking, how do I get out of here? And then I had to have this moment of, no, I'm okay. What's required of me right now is nothing. Like I can just be here for whatever's happening. And I just I actually laid down and just rested and kind of let it all roll over me. And then, after the first round was open, they opened the door and they said, how are you doing? And I said, I think I'm okay. And then it just became right, I'm going through really hard things and it's terrifying. And the fear or the default is to leave your body.
Yes.
And to run away from the hard thing and to totally go away from community, make the thing stop, but actually just the learning that I have, nobody kind of, there were some people, they give a little bit of teaching, but mostly it was come and sit in this created room with a bunch of guys, make it dark, sing songs, pray, and have heat.
Yes.
And I learned detox. More. And yeah, absolutely.
It's really a detox. It's letting things go. And even the sweating is part of letting things. It's a detoxing of all the toxins in your body. But then you think about that spiritually and collectively and communally. Yeah. It's beautiful. And
tough men just crying, just weeping.
Yeah.
As they're going through that journey.
A safe place to let things out and let things go. Yeah. And not hold them in. And yeah, I think there's so much to learn and so many wise cultures and people different from ourselves to help us on that journey. And that's really what we want to do is just literally we're beggars telling other beggars, not where we found knowledge, but where we found bread. Yeah. And, so stay tuned to the space. If you want to check it out, go to deepwideacademy.com, deepwideacademy.com.
That's right.
We'll put a link in the show notes. And we're going to start probably talking about this more and featuring different courses that we're doing with different folks. But we're excited. And so if this is something that excites you and you want to go have a look and check it out. And then if you are someone that has an idea for a course and you're a beggar that found bread and you're like, hey, what about this? Maybe reach out to us too at info at deepwideacademy.com. Yep. And propose it. I mean, we're not going to be gatekeepers in this, and we've got some ideas of how that could work. And if you're somebody that wants to get in on spreading the word, there's a thing called an affiliate. You could become an affiliate and you could help us spread the word. And there's some arrangement where that could be a win for you and something that would benefit you as well. So we just really want to be a community that are really learning and not just puffing ourselves up with knowledge and congratulating ourselves on how smart we are, but we want to live well and we want to live what we know we really want to be wise.
Yeah. Yeah. We're excited about it. Please do come and join us. We think it'll be better together to do it.
Let's do it. deepwideacademy.com. Maybe we'll see you there.